By 1944, the war in Europe had ceased to be a series of rapid offensives. It had become a grinding struggle of attrition. Germany was forced to fight on multiple fronts at once. In Italy, against the Red Army in the east, and preparing to repel an Allied invasion in the west. The Wehrmacht was losing momentum. Yet despite clear defeats, Germany did not capitulate. The central reason was Adolf Hitler. Unlike most dictators, Hitler retained absolute control over military planning. His orders were final, and any dissent within the command was punished by immediate dismissal or repression. He did not merely rule. He was the center of the entire decision-making system. Intelligence reports from Germany repeated the same conclusion. Remove Hitler and the command structure would begin to unravel. That became the key argument in London. As early as 1942, British intelligence MI6 and the Special Operations Executive produced an analytical report. The Führer is the regime's center of gravity. His elimination would significantly accelerate Germany's collapse. The discussion did not stop there. By 1943, Britain began to study the practical question. Was it physically possible to liquidate Hitler? By 1944, it was clear. The war would not end quickly. Germany resisted desperately. The morale of the population, despite destruction, remained substantial. Goebbels' propaganda worked. Defeats were framed as tactical withdrawals. In London, the conclusion was reached. If Germany keeps fighting to the last, millions more will die. On the SOE table for the first time lay the plan that might change the war. Operation Foxley, a plan to assassinate Adolf Hitler. This was not an impulsive decision. It was an analytical conclusion. Eliminating the Führer opened a chance to destroy the command system and ease German resistance. But killing Hitler would shift the war to a new moral and political level. It was not just a military act, it was a precedent of state assassination. Thus, one of the most secret operations in British history was born. An operation that was never executed, but could have changed the course of World War II. Attempts to kill Hitler had varied motives and forms, from lone citizen acts to military conspiracies and covert intelligence schemes. The British and SOE literally compiled a catalogue of errors. Each failure revealed a technical, organizational, or psychological weakness that needed correction. Understanding those errors became the core of Foxley's development. The first general lesson was unpreparedness for uncertainty. George Elser in 1939 showed that you could blow up a speech but not manage the aftermath. His act was brave but isolated. There was no infrastructure to replace leadership after the death. Assassination without a governance plan produces a vacuum and possibly greater violence. Britain needed not just elimination, but elimination plus plan. A mechanism to realize political effect. Second lesson: technicalities matter. Attempts relying on explosives often failed because of details. Temperature in cargo holds, detonator reliability, placement relative to the target. Trescow's group on the Eastern Front used surprise bombs several times. Many devices simply failed due to factors that seemed trivial. That taught Foxley planners to think in engineering terms. Device construction, choice of mechanism, testing in conditions close to reality. Third lesson: access. Many plots failed because the person with access to Hitler wavered, hesitated, or could not act. Having a man with access is not a guarantee of success if his position is too visible or he is vulnerable to stress. British analysts concluded that it was optimal not to rely on a single agent but to have multiple parallel access channels and a densely interwoven network of informants able to act if the primary plan failed. Fourth lesson: communication and managing consequences. After any attempt, it was essential to disseminate legitimate information immediately to control the reaction inside the country and internationally. Without control of radio and key communications, eliminating the leader delivered no political effect. British planners fixed this. If you want outcome, prepare the channels that will manage the aftermath and present the event advantageously for the Allies. Fifth lesson: moral and political risk. Many in London recognized that killing Hitler was military logic but also a political precedent. How would neutral countries react? How would Germans react? Could a power vacuum bring more radials to authority and increase terror? Foxley codified a principle. Kill only if there is a high probability the outcome will ease the end of the war and save lives. not for revenge but strategy. Sixth lesson: secrecy and cell security. Many conspiracies were compromised by poor communications, careless letters, or misplaced trust. Conspiracy requires professional tradecraft. Codes, ciphers, vetted couriers, clean logistic routes with minimal witnesses. SOE tightened security standards after each failure. Seventh and final insight: plan flexibility. Recognizing the fragility of one-off actions, Foxley's designers built several execution options: sniper assassination, poisoning, staged accidents, or sabotage during transit. Having options and detailed Plan Bs compensated for inevitable failures. This systematization made Foxley not just another list of measures but a deliberately designed operation. Every technical, human, and political weakness had a corresponding solution. Next, we will see who in the British services actually turned those lessons into a plan. The role of MI6, SOE, and the analysts who dared propose a step many in the British elite considered too radical. Operation Foxley was born in the shadows of British intelligence. It did not originate with politicians in London. It was not initiated at Churchill's desk or debated in Parliament. It emerged where risky, dirty operations are planned, in the Special Operations Executive, SOE, created by Churchill in 1940 to set Europe ablaze. SOE carried out what the government officially denied: sabotage, subversion, targeted eliminations, and agent work in occupied countries. Unlike MI6, which gathered intelligence, SOE acted to break enemy infrastructure. When the question of killing Hitler became practical, SOE took responsibility for drafting the operation. The initiative did not appear from nowhere. By 1943, an analytical group, Section X, existed in London, an SOE unit focused on Germany. It included specialists in German politics, deception, and psychological operations. Key figures in Foxley's preparation were Colonel Ronald Thornley of SOE and Major Colin Gabbins, one of SOE's operational architects. Gabbins favored active measures: do not wait for Germany to collapse, accelerate its downfall by all available means. Thornley was tasked with ensuring the operation wasn't romantic espionage but an engineerable, logistical proposition. MI6 joined later. Their involvement became necessary when it became clear that to kill Hitler, Britain needed precise human intelligence on his routes, habits, movement schedules, and security patterns. That required agent work inside Germany. MI6 supplied SOE with liaison officers and limited aware-sourced intelligence through double agents. A key product was the combined Hitler dossier prepared by SOE and MI6. Contained health reports on Hitler, his daily routine, a list of habits and superstitions, levels and patterns of his security and flight routes, identified potential vulnerabilities. After poring over the dossier in SOE's Baker Street headquarters, the verdict was succinct: his death is possible. This was not emotion, it was a specialist conclusion. They identified a weak point. Hitler had become too predictable. He feared assassination and avoided unnecessary travel, but his routines created vulnerabilities. Now they needed to find a place where he could be reached. That place was in the Bavarian Alps. Berghof. The Berghof was a country residence in the Bavarian Alps, a reconstructed house on a slope, a forward headquarters on occasion. Hitler summered here, invited close associates, and received Joseph Goebbels in person. The villa's layout, an open terrace, views across wooded slopes, made the Berghof simultaneously intimate and vulnerable. A place where the dictator relaxed but where security nevertheless operated intensively. British intelligence studied the Berghof for years. The dossier recorded periods of stay, timings of walks, garden layouts, and reception schedules. Crucially, it catalogued Hitler's habits. He liked certain observation platforms, preferred specific rooms, and was resistant to changing his routine. For Foxley planners, that meant one thing: the location was more predictable than many battlefields and thus easier to anticipate behavior. But predictability did not equal vulnerability. Dense SS protection, patrols, and air control surrounded the site. SOE and MI6 acquired photographs, schematic plans of the residence, records of guard rotations, and approaches to the villa. Analysts noted that the main risk was not finding the moment but ensuring that, after the act, a political effect would follow. whoever announced Hitler's death, who would ensure a transition of power, and how to prevent chaos and a SS clampdown. Answers to these questions determined the operation's acceptability. Berghof thus became the focal point. On the one hand, approachability. On the other, concentrated personal security, local features and ritualized routines that could swing against the plotters. This chapter traces how intelligence mapped routes, architectural and climatic constraints, and why the Berghof emerged as Foxley's prime candidate. Hitler's security was a whole machine, from his personal guard to air cover. At the Berghof SS detachments, personal guards, local police, and special squads stood watch, their numbers and training increasing as the perceived threat rose. SOE studied security protocols, posts, patrol circuits, rotation times, procedures for incidents. A key variable was flexibility. Hitler liked spontaneity and could change plans suddenly. The protection apparatus relied on routines and procedure. This provided ambiguity. Routine made prediction easier. Frequent rotations and unpredictability made the operational picture unstable. Foxley planners had to account for both predictable habits and random interventions. There was also a political barrier. Any assassination at his residence risked collateral casualties among entourage and civilians. That was morally fraught and risked provoking mass reprisals and strengthening radical elements. Tactics had to consider not just security but the structure of authority that could instantly marshal repressive power. This chapter presents a chronology of security measures in 1943 to 1944 drawn from MI6 reports and analyses how these measures changed the probability of success. It also examines how the psychology of guards and staff influenced decisions. Rumors, discipline, fear, all were part of the calculus. Understanding limits and risks, the British team developed multiple action options. Important. Here we discuss concepts rather than engineering specifics, which options were considered and why. The first scenario was a minimalist operative strike, a targeted killing during a walk or a relatively unguarded reception when protective coverage was dispersed. The second was staging an accident along a transit route, vehicle collision or a fall. The third involved tampering with food or medicine to produce death quietly. The fourth envisaged interference with transport and conveyance. Each option was evaluated for political consequences, logistical feasibility, and likelihood of collateral victims. For example, options involving public incidents required prior control of information flows and the ability to legitimize subsequent actions. In short, plotters could not be satisfied with mere elimination. They had to project the political aftermath. This chapter examines pros and cons for each concept and why some were rejected on political rather than technical grounds. The operation needed reliable information: routes, schedules, entourages, guard changes, and terrain specifics. MI6 and SOE built multi-channel networks. Human sources, defectors, agents in legal and semi-legal contexts, covert observation, and open-source analysis. Sources varied in quality. Some were former German officials disillusioned with the regime. Others were émigrés and field agents. Each source underwent cross-verification before entering the operational file. A practice called habit mapping was crucial, compiling detailed movement charts and time templates. Logistics were supplied by SOE assets: transport, safe passages through neutral areas, temporary base preparations, and evacuation planning. A vital element was also cover, legends under which agents would operate, and communications channels capable of reporting the event to London without interception. This chapter analyses how information was collected and checked, where operatives came from, what risks Britain accepted, and how they sought to minimize the possibility of error when making the final decision. Selecting operatives was about more than skill. It was about legitimacy, diplomacy, and risk. SOE considered categories: émigré agents, former Germans, locals with access to Bavaria, professional mercenaries, and special forces operatives. Key criteria were reliability and secrecy. An agent had to act calmly and not become a black label, exposing the network. If captured, interrogation could reveal the whole chain. If he was British, the international fallout would be catastrophic. The option of recruiting an insider, someone already close to the residence, was discussed but deemed risky given SS scrutiny. SOE concluded the safest route was a small, highly autonomous team with clear instructions and an easy escape route after completion. This chapter sketches psychological profiles of potential operatives, historical parallels of similar missions, and addresses the moral problem: whom to entrust with a state-ordered killing. Not all decisions were made in SOE's shadow. In London, at the Foreign Office and in Churchill's inner circle, moral and diplomatic implications were debated. Killing Hitler, however morally justified, carried international consequences. Britain worried: how would the USSR and the USA react? What about neutral countries? Could the death of Hitler be used by the Soviets to press for increased influence in post-war Germany? Winston Churchill personally influenced many wartime choices. His circle was divided. Some saw assassination as a radical but necessary move to shorten the war and save lives. Others warned that by assuming the executioner role, Britain would create a dangerous precedent and damage its standing as a rule-based state. This chapter presents minutes of debates, arguments pro and con, and analysis of foreign policy risks. Special attention is paid to Soviet reaction. London feared the USSR might exploit such an act to advance its post-war position in Europe. Any serious operation includes fallbacks. SOE prepared extraction plans, ways to destroy evidence and methods to minimize blowback. Primarily these concerned communications, agent legends and pathways for withdrawal. But in this case the problem was deeper. The action could trigger mass SS reprisals and intensified internal purges. British planners modeled mitigation via information campaigns that might present the event as an internal coup weakening radicals, not foreign intervention. But options were limited. Radio and press in Germany were tightly controlled. This chapter outlines precautionary measures and analyses why even well-designed safeguards could not guarantee avoidance of catastrophic side effects. By late 1944, with Allied pressure mounting and Soviet armies advancing, Foxley discussions moved into operational mode. Concrete variants were prepared, resources allocated, and preliminary training conducted under simulated conditions, without revealing true operational technicalities. SOE approved plans. Intelligence judged that the present weakness in Germany gave a higher chance of success and a smaller probability of destabilizing chaos. The logic: in a collapsing state, removing the dictator could accelerate disintegration of central control without catastrophic consolidation by radicals. Yet the ultimate decision was not operational but political. Who has the right to decide the fate of an enemy head of state? In London and Washington, views on legitimacy diverged. Not everyone in Britain's establishment supported the extraordinary step. The Foreign Office and Parliament expressed alarm about international legitimacy. The principal fear: an act of state assassination could produce an uncontrolled chain of events in which Germany did not capitulate but instead doubled down, intensifying repression and prolonging the war. Some objections rested on principle. Assassination is not a prerogative a democratic government should assume. Others were pragmatic. How to prove to allies the action would yield more benefit than harm. Historical precedents showed such moves carried unpredictable consequences. This chapter presents the internal correspondence and cabinet papers that reveal the strain. Were there alternatives? Perhaps. But the political weight of doubt became one of the decisive factors shaping Foxley's fate. Although SOE and MI6 stood ready, Foxley was never executed. The reasons for cancellation were multi-layered. First, the shifting operational context. By late 1944 and early 1945, the front lines approached Germany and Allied invasion plans matured. Killing Hitler risked unpredictable reactions and could alter endgame dynamics. Second, domestic politics. The cabinet and foreign office resisted assuming the role of judge and executioner. Fear of international backlash, especially from the Soviet Union, which might use the act to press for post-war advantages, weighed heavily. Third, uncertainty of outcomes. Even a successful assassination did not guarantee immediate regime collapse. Radicals or inner-circle figures could fill the vacuum and continue hostilities more fiercely. These factors combined made the operation excessively risky. The ratio of potential benefit to risk was low. Thus Foxley remained in the archives as a carefully reasoned but unexecuted plan, not out of cowardice, but out of deliberate caution. Had Foxley been carried out, the consequences would have varied. Optimistic scenarios envisioned Hitler's death leading to command collapse, demoralization at the top and earlier surrender, thus saving lives. Pessimists foresaw the assassination prompting SS mobilization, harsher repression and prolonged resistance. The real effect would depend on many variables: who announced the death, who seized radio and administrative control, how key generals reacted, how the Allies responded, and how the populace behaved. That is why British planners were cautious. In a high-uncertainty environment, even morally justified acts could have unpredictable geopolitical fallout. This chapter analyses alternate histories, probabilistic scenarios, and modern interpretations of how a single action might have reshaped Europe's post-war map. Foxley remained in the archives, but studying it is relevant today. Historians debate whether the plan was a legitimate instrument of war or an act of political immorality. The analysis shows the question of dictator assassination is not solely military. It is a political dilemma with ethical consequences. On one hand, eliminating Hitler looked like pragmatic logic: shorten the war, reduce suffering, save lives. On the other, it was a precedent of violating norms of international behavior that could undermine trust in Western policy and create new risks during post-war settlement. Historical fairness requires recognizing that those who prepared Foxley acted from calculations intended to minimize casualties and maximize political effect. They were not seeking revenge but a tool to speed Europe's recovery. Although the plan was not executed, its existence reflects a harsh wartime truth. Moral choices collide with brutal necessity, and answers are seldom simple.